Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm a partner and the director of geopolitical analysis at Cognitive Investments. Joining me on the podcast is one of my favorite repeat guests. It's Jacek Bartosiak, who is the CEO and founder of Strategy&Future in Poland. It was a pretty sobering conversation about the trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine war and how Jacek is thinking about Poland's future in that context. Some apologies off the bat. Jacek was not feeling particularly well. As you can hear in my voice, I'm not feeling particularly well, but we both set aside the time to record and wanted to bring you this. Also, about halfway through the recording, for some reason, my platform just completely shut down and my video wouldn't turn back on. So the first 30 minutes or so, we do have video of Jacek and I talking if you're looking at this on YouTube, but for the last part of the conversation, we don't have video. And if anything feels disjointed, I'm sure the editor, our fearless editor, whose name is also Jacob, will go in and stitch things together. But if you hear any incongruities or things like that, that's what we were fighting through both technical difficulties and the frailties of the human condition. Otherwise, listeners, you can email me at jacob@cognitive.investments if you have any questions about Cognitive Investments, our wealth management services, our research and consulting services, or you just want to talk about the incredible material that we're delivering to you on the podcast. Cheers, take good care, hug the people you love. See you out there. I'm under the weather, as you can tell in my voice. Jacek is also under the weather, and we care so much about you, dear listeners, that we're podcasting anyway. Jacek, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Nice to see you again. Thank you for hosting me in your podcast.
Pleasure. I hope one of these days to host you in person rather than having to do it over video. But such is life.
Sure, I come over with pleasure if the circumstances permit that.
Yeah, of course. I guess we could begin in a lot of places. Maybe the place to begin is, Poland had a pretty significant election here in the last month or so. Does the result change anything for you? We're recording here on November 7th. I know that the president says that the PIS gets to try and form a government. They probably won't be able to form one. Probably Tusk is going to be the prime minister. But does that change anything from your sort of broader macro geopolitical perspective? Or is this just leaders come and go, but geopolitics stays the same?
Yeah, leaders come and go. Geopolitics stays the same. But there are two elements connected to these elections. One element is that increasingly so, the world is becoming chaotic. At least this is what we feel here in Warsaw, in Poland, in Eurasia. It's less and less predictable, and there is a feeling, at least this is my personal opinion, my team at Strategy and Future, that it is less about programs and election campaigns of some leaders, what changes he or she will introduce and to what she's going to do or he's going to do. It will be more about the test of characters, because the chaotic times are throwing events like stones on your face, and you need to prove the character, and this is called leadership, regardless of your opinions and partisan appearances. Having said that, though, I must add that there is a feeling across Warsaw that this new government, although it will take ages before it's formed probably because of the issue of counting the representatives, majority and so on, it will be more European, sort of pro-European, less pro-American. If that counts still, in my opinion, it counts, although Europe is as a concept, is much weaker. It's a much weaker concept than even when we talked last time. But still it matters, and for sure the people that voted for those people, for the new people, live in this I call it imaginarium, that the old things will be restored, and we'll be living happily ever after because Europe will deal with all those issues for us and so on.
Are you still fundamentally, well, let me say, I'm fundamentally optimistic about Poland. And in some ways, I'm optimistic about Poland, not because of anything you guys are doing. It's just that it seems to me that the times that Poland rises in world history is when Russia is weak and when Germany is weak. And you look across and Russia looks awfully weak to me. And Germany doesn't look like it's about to set anybody on fire either. Do you feel optimistic about the future for Poland? I mean, the last time we talked, you were talking about how everybody had 3 and 4 Ukrainian immigrants in their houses, and that Poland saw that maybe Russia wasn't going to be this threat that it's been worrying about for years. Has any of that optimism dampened for you?
I share your attitude that there is some, window for optimism, but it will require the leadership, proper leadership in Poland, and a bit of luck, or at least not a bit, quite a lot. First of all, Russia really needs to lose this war, and I'm not sure if it's going to happen. So a lot will hang on the how the war in Ukraine will unfold in the coming months. Second, is that Germany will not continue pushing for Eurasian consolidation because right now they want to ride the European consolidation project, and I think that they didn't dump the dreams about Russia being still an element in European landscape, and China as well, for the products of German economy and some sort of the dreamed of economic cooperation across Eurasian landmass. And that doesn't fit well, of course, with the Polish grand strategy. So, but Poland is, of course, not a big country. So still I have many questions that our leadership will need to solve and navigate through those waters.
Is it fair to say that France, though, is more aligned with Poland's conception of the world? Because it seems like there has been a huge shift in Macron's thinking towards Russia. Is that empty?
Macron is, I think, despite his rhetoric, superficial elements, he's from the Bismarckian school of realpolitik, I think. Sometimes when he's sincere, he shares, he lets audience watch through those dark corners somewhere. And that was the case in Bratislava, probably, which you referred to, his speech in Bratislava in Slovakia, where he referred that Russia didn't turn out to be a great power because it faced debacle at the gates of Kiev. So in this game of iron dice, they didn't manage to prevail. And that means that the Central and Eastern Europeans, he didn't use the word intermarium, but it was close, and deserved the right at the, sort of the deciding table in European matters. But, I think he was flattering Central Europeans for the time being, because he needed to push the reform of European institutions. Plus, he's always preoccupied with the German stature in Europe, and he wanted to vote some our enthusiasm over European influence. So I don't, but it's my fault. I don't trust French. So that's it. Plus, maybe he finally didn't talk about the French power projection in Central and Eastern Europe. He understood that this is a little bit ridiculous and laughable. But before, since he was treating us here as the sort of peripheral guys who don't get a thing, he talked at length about how the French will provide nuclear deterrence, and stuff, and so on. So there is some shift in French approach, but I'm increasingly constantly pessimistic whether the continental Europeans still know where they want to go. They know, but how they want to get there, I'm not so sure, so to speak.
Yeah. Before we get to the war itself, because I want to get your take on where the war is right now, and it's probably going to be a depressing part of the conversation, but do you think that Ukraine is a European Union member by the end of the decade, or do you think that Ukraine will not join?
I think they will not join the European Union. And they will not join NATO, although functionally they are a NATO member because they treat Russia, and they if NATO was about security arrangement in Europe that precludes Russia's preeminence, so Ukraine is functionally at NATO. And that's how we view it here in Warsaw. And we are vastly disappointed by how the entire West is handling this thing.
Well, I mean, they can't functionally be in NATO if the NATO countries aren't going to come send their soldiers to
Of
defend
course,
Ukraine from Russia. No?
of course, but still they are treated. Yeah, but that's of course true, but they are treating Russia. And if the United States really wants to remain the European power, so they need to the Americans need to convince the Russians that the war objectives are unachievable, because the war was about that. The war was whether the United States is a European power and has a say in European matters. And U.S. said it's a bluff. I mean, Lavrov's ultimatum is a bluff, and they say it's not a bluff. And it's not a bluff, so show it. Okay, so we are showing, and basically that was the case. Wes Mitchell, in his Marathon Initiative for the Office of Net Assessment, prior to the war, he announced that the United States needs a sequencing strategy. So first, to face Russia, treat it, stop its expansionism towards the European peninsula, so that Russian policy moves to the east of Asia, and in the process creates conflicting fields with China. Yeah, and the Americans are halfway there, so to speak. Halfway there, because the war allowed the United States to achieve two objectives, relatively, but not finally. Treat Russia, but the verdict is still there. And second, more important, is that this war enabled the United States to create the anti-Russian coalition in Europe, expand NATO, and enhance its position as a European power, and also create the conditions for creating anti-China, maybe, which is still doubtful, creating some sort of resentment against the revisionist power of China among European partners, so at least some of them who fear the Russian expansionism, and and by extension also the Chinese expansionism, whatever you call it. So that set good conditions for the American foreign policy to create proper coalitions centered around the United States and its grand objectives. But in case of China, it's still in the process, and there are many doubts whether it's doable. And in case of Russia, it was done, but didn't embrace all major, I think, fully embrace of Germany, for example. So, but still, it's a much better position that the United States had after Kabul debacle and December Lavrov's ultimatum in 2021, right? So this is something. And deterrence held in NATO. It didn't hold in case of Ukraine. This was a major deterrence failure. Maybe a calibrated one as well, because it was not deterrable. And the United States wanted to create this anti-Russian coalition. And they did so. But in case of NATO territory, and I had many doubts whether this deterrence would hold. I was listening to Biden's words live in Warsaw, in the Royal Castle, and a few days into the war, and I feared that the Russians might test the promises that Biden delivered. Still, it turned out that Biden was right and I was wrong. So it happens that I'm wrong, Jacob. Deterrence held.
I wouldn't be too hard on yourself, because
Thanks.
I mean the White House was ready to give up Ukraine. I mean, the United States pulled all of its diplomats out of Kyiv. I mean, it was it wrote it off. The Ukrainians were able to push the Russians back, which I think nobody expected in that score.
Yeah, I fully agree. So they surprised everybody, and But I feared that the Russians might attack J-Town, Rzeszów-Jesionka, the main logistical hub from which from the Polish territory. Ukraine is supplied with ammunition and resources. And I was, if there was some sort of complacency, or the Russians would see lack of resolve somehow in demonstrating by Americans, I fear that also they might try to attack the Polish territory, also to show the divergence of interest between U.S. and Poland, and create the in NATO, inside NATO, some of the political tensions, how to react to, using the Biden's words, minor incursions. Remember, he talked about minor incursions in case of Ukraine, in a way inviting the sort of the coercion, and compellence by Russians this way or another. So I think the historians will write good histories about what really happened between December 2021 and what happened in the attack on Kiev, in terms of the diplomatic exchanges and this, signaling and dance, and demonstrating capabilities and what really happened.
Well, yeah, which historians, though, because we still don't have a victor, which is as good as a segue into the war as anything else. What do you think about the war? From my point of view, it looks pretty depressing. We had that Ukrainian general come out last week and say it looked like a stalemate, and unless he had what seemed like completely unrealistic technological expansion, that the war, he compared it to World War I. And at the same time, Russia doesn't seem to be able to do anything on its end. It had that weird counteroffensive in Donetsk, which has blown up in its face. So where are you on the progress of the war up to date here in November?
The maneuver is dead because of the parity of sides, and of course the density of sensors on the battlefield, especially drones, reconnaissance. It's very difficult to concentrate mass, to achieve the breakthrough, to achieve the prevalence in some parts of the fronts. The tanks are decimated. If you use the tanks in the old school way, they are decimated. Infantry is a key, but it is being decimated by indirect fires if the sensors are there. So every move out of the dirt, out of the trench, is deadly for both sides, as long as there is ammo. So it's about war on ammo. There is a hunger of ammunition. Ukrainians constantly complain about lack of ammo for their artillery. The Russians less so. They faced some deficiencies, but they have, North Korea, and they have their own production facilities, while the West didn't actually ramp up in real life the production of ammo. We call it a teaspoon strategy of helping Ukraine. And it's perfect for the U.S., Jacob, if I may, have audacity to say so, because the Americans are the victors so far, for sure. Not the Ukrainians. America is winning. As I said before, it created the anti-Russian coalition. The war unfolds better than expected, and the Russians are treated. Land forces of Russia are being treated big time. I think the maneuver is that maybe the winter and the numbers that the Russians may bring to the battlefield might tilt a bit to the side of Russians. But what I think is that the time of reckoning is coming in terms of how solid is the Western support for a continuation of this war. That's number one. Second is that there is a major rift between the military and the political domain in Ukraine. The soldiers hate Zelensky. That might be novel for the U.S. listeners, but the soldiers love their general, Zaluzhny. They trust him. He led them into battle. He opposed political decisions, because political decisions around Zelensky were focused upon creating the mood in the Western capitals that it's okay, we're showing, whether Bakhmut or elsewhere, give us more ammo, we're doing fine. There are a lot of photos, a lot of stuff, right? The soldiers were dying there, and sometimes in stupid attempts to achieve some political objectives just for show. And this is the feeling. Plus, Ukrainians didn't reform their country. So there is a major injustice in mobilization process that citizens feel it. Plus, the country is devastated by war, by lack of real economy, mobilization, by fleeing the people. I think that the implosion of the Ukraine is probable.
Probable.
Yes.
What does that look like?
If they don't have the financial resources to hold on fighting, if they do not reform their recruit base, they're struggling, and there is no ammo.
Is there any chance that they can produce their own ammunition? I mean, I know that they've talked about producing their own ammo, and you've got German and it's a pipe dream.
There is no the consumption of ammo is manifold bigger than expected before the war, and now it's the NATO, especially 155 caliber artillery shells, and the NATO doesn't produce them in sufficient numbers, so let alone Ukraine. So the soldiers constantly complain about lack of ammo. Jacob, they are fighting bravely. They put up a fierce resistance. They treated the Russian army, but the numbers tell. The Russian population is 4 times bigger, and they have the industrial capacity, and maybe not that big as during the Soviet Union, but they do. And they have resources, they have raw materials. And if China joined, which they have not,
right,
then there will be a Chinese land-lease, which will change the Eurasia. But the Chinese don't want to do it because they don't want to have a war, the global war with the United States. So I think that it's all about Xi Jinping and this guy, he makes a call whether, there will be a World War III or not. And he said no, for the time being. Let's recall the Second World War, by the way, and the posturing and positioning of big players, and the late years of the 30s and the opening years of the war.
Yes, and I think we're getting a fairly good stress test of that right now, because China's it seems like it's fostering better relations with the United States, even as the Philippines and China keep on tripping over each other in the South China Sea, and aircraft carriers from both China and the United States keep shadowboxing in the South China Sea. But it doesn't look to me like China has the appetite.
No, China doesn't have an appetite for war, but, war might have appetite for you, as Trotsky used to say, even if you don't have the appetite for war. So what is very upsetting or preoccupying for me are the recent signals. For example, the recent article in the Foreign Affairs, I think from yesterday, that there might be some talks about non-first use by the US-China talks of nuclear weapons, non-first use, because, as you well know, the United States has had this ambiguity. So there is this doctrine on that the United States, in defense of their allies in Eurasian Rimland, they might use nukes first to deter or to stop the conventional invasion or war. And the United States consistently, across the Cold War and stuff, tended to say that they might use nukes first to consolidate the credibility and reassurance. And if there is this talk that around Taiwan, if there is an incident in Taiwan, let's not use nukes, let's confine ourselves only to conventional exchanges. So this is sort of excluded from the escalation ladder up to the top rung of it. It is highly escalatory. If they agree to it, it's highly escalatory because, all tokens are in the game. Let's have a big battle, naval battle there. And we'll see who prevails. So I would be if those talks continue and those ideas that are being that surface in the sea these days, I will be very much preoccupied as an ally. U.S. ally located right at the stone throws of nuclear power, ominous nuclear power.
Well, so when is Poland going to develop its own nuclear weapons then? Because it seems to me that's the logical extension of what you just said.
I think it will not in the foreseeable future for many reasons. Not only because this is expensive, not only because this is very sophisticated, and it would, entail a major industrial feat and effort by Poland. But our dear friends in EU would really, if they don't want us to have the nuclear plants or even other things that are less sort of, power related, they would strongly oppose it. And the United States would strongly oppose this idea because the United States has consistently been against proliferation since 1945. And the United States played hand in hand with the Soviets to make sure that it's not proliferated. Of course, recently at Strategy&Future, we have noticed the softening up of this American approach in two cases. And some people may say it's a conspiracy theory, but I feel that the Americans sent signals to Australia, the AUKUS deal, that, but at the end of the day, you might have your own nukes, and that would deter from any power projection of a major power against you across the sea. So you will be on the safe side. And then, only then, would that AUKUS deal would be good for you, for Australia, I think, long term. And I think maybe that's why we have this Hamas thing, because there were negotiations between Israelis and Saudis and Americans how to divert the Saudis from this deal with Iran and China, which was inked earlier this year. And the Saudis demanded the right to enrich the uranium.
Yeah, for civilian nuclear purposes.
Yeah, exactly. So there are signals that Americans are getting softer on their resolve. That has been with the world since Hiroshima, and that might be the only way to uphold the alliance system in Rimlands Eurasia and the world ocean in the face of the major amount of industrial power of China and the consolidated front of Russia and China in the heartland of Eurasia, posed against the United States and its allies. We will see. And then Poland, of course, would be on the list, yeah. But leadership and many things. And if I had to make a decision now, as a prime minister, I would be against it. Let me put it that way, given all structural circumstances.
Let's go back to the war for a second, because I'm a little shocked, honestly, at the level of your pessimism about it, and it's hard to square because even less than 6 months ago, Prigozhin is marching on Moscow, and it doesn't the emperor has no clothes. It looks like Putin can't possibly be in charge of a government that can sustain itself. The Russian economy is in shambles. Ukraine is announcing its counteroffensive. Now we get to November. Prigozhin is dead. Putin apparently is fine. The emperor is reinstated. And to your point, we've seen a lot of reporting in just the last week about the internal strife within Ukraine itself, which is it's cognitive dissonance to be frank about it. So, when you say that you think that the implosion of Ukraine is probable, that's you saying that you think Russia's going to win the war, is it not?
I think they may create the status quo and create conditions for передышка, for strategic pause, regrouping, reset, and then come back again up to the modernization. That's what I fear. So you probably put more stock then in this idea that the Europeans and the Americans are pressuring Ukraine to negotiate with the Russians? Because that was the big news of last week. You think that's actually happening? It's brewing somewhere, I think.
But you think Ukraine would say yes to that? I can't imagine.
They would say no, but what can they do? What the South Vietnamese could do?
Well, so what happens for Poland then if Russia gets its desired outcome here, where there's a regrouping? This sounds like a worst case scenario for Poland. You go from, getting to rise with Russia's weakness to a Russia that is weaker, but also emboldened, that won in the end. It sounds very bad.
It depends on our leadership, basically, whether we will embark on this historic mission that has been with us for the last 500 years and confronted with Russia in the intermedium, building a real military, not auxiliary force of the US, and being a player in the region, including the hybrid thing, and also taking on the active foreign policy in Belarus and Ukraine, and the Baltic states in our own hands, in Sweden and Finland, to enhance the American tendency to create a hub-and-spoke system within NATO. I think that would require a new opening with the United States as well, to create what I call the protocol of proportionality. Because, there will be cases, and there have been such signals in the US DC-based security community and strategy community that, America is so thin everywhere that they need allies to take a bigger role, especially in this, asymmetrical hybrid thing that you never know whether this Article 5 scenario or not. So, why heck, entering the war with nukes and stuff, while it might be at limited level somewhere there, right? And I think that Poles would need to some sort of enter a proportionality clause with the US, what we can do against Russians on our own if they play around, monkey around from Belarus or Kulebits, Kaliningrad, without asking the US for permission, without having American sensors, without having American indirect fires, without having American surveillance systems and situational awareness system. But of course, that takes a leadership among my dear compatriots to do it. But this is what we advocate at Strategy and Future. And I know that many Americans would agree, okay, if we really field it professionally and there is a sound proportionality in it, right? But of course, in order to achieve it, we need to convince the Americans that we are mature, responsible, professional. We really know how to reform the military just as opposed to just buying shiny toys, and feel a real force and a real resilience system in Poland to do it. If we do it, then of course we'll rise and we will do. The intermedium will rise. We might also embolden Ukrainians to change, and the Belarusians to switch, and and the Baltics to feel more secure, and cooperate with Sweden, which is I think our main collaborator if we take on this path, and that would also give us a sort of a plan B if United States decides to stop being America the empire and become an America the country.
It just does seem like a very pessimistic point of view, but how could you not be pessimistic with the sweep of Polish history that you've endured?
Oh yeah, and we are not weep at Strategy and Future. We do not weep and whine. We propose, steps forward to change things. Just to create a new model army, made a civilizational step forward on how people interact in the army. Change the strategic culture of Poland and move forward and face this challenge, because we want to remain Poland and we want to remain independent from Russia. We don't want Russia to be a European player, simply, and that's what we need the military for. Hopefully with some help of the US, but we also need to prepare ourselves for this scenario that Lynn Allen has been advocating actually, and I like this phrase of hers. That America, the empire, must end. America, the country, will be a very wealthy and still influential actor in global affairs, but it not be positioned in Eurasia, Eurasian landmass. And what happens if this happens, so to speak, And I will not relocate my country from the Wisła River Valley system,
Yeah. It seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong for interpreting this from what you said, it sounds to me like you don't think that the Tusk government is going to be the one that will lead Poland to this future. Am I reading you correctly, or do you even want to say anything about that?
I just, honestly, I don't know. by the same token, maybe the former government couldn't take us there because of some sort of the harshness on edges. And I think that not a good direction of the military reform. I don't know. I don't know. They must starting performing power. If they are, once they are in the office, they are not yet, and we will see. Sometimes tough times produce great leaders, even if formerly those leaders were not showing signs of leadership. I don't know, because of the sunny geopolitical weather. Right? I don't know. I still believe, though, in the Polish society, and the Polish society underwent a major transformation, Jacob, since the war in Ukraine began. There is a major awakening, a major support for the Ukrainian cause, a major societal consent to the huge spending. This is the largest spending in the history, in the 1,000 years of the Polish kingdom history, okay? In relative terms, including, okay? Bigger than the great reforms of King Batory in the 16th century, when we marched on Moscow and we took major, fortresses on the way there. Yeah, bigger than the Władysław IV, the king, and it's a major spending reform, a major undertaking. We will see whether the new government will continue this line. That's why I am very, sparing. Yes, I speak sparingly about it. Because I don't know what they will do. And but the ambitions were huge. Poland wanted to build a force. This I can tell you. Yeah? Forming the 5th and the 6th divisions, new south of Warsaw, east of Warsaw, buying a lot of equipment. I think that if the former government had prevailed in the elections, there would be also a conversation about the debate about the restoration of the conscription in Poland and the mass reserve build up, something like that. But the new government, which is going to be liberal, of course, we're talking to the liberal voters that, guys, get your gear. In 2 days' time, welcome to the eastern frontier, with your boots in the mud in wintertime. This is what you voted for. Might not sell well, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because there's this, you need to understand, Jacob, that Poland has grown incessantly since the collapse of the communism, and it's a major tiger in Poland. People have a very nice life in Warsaw and elsewhere. Very good, balanced lifestyle. We are, tiger of Europe. There is no unemployment. And suddenly, and they have a very good life. It's very, very nice to live in Warsaw, take 2 hours, less than 2 hours flight to Rome or Spain or, Mediterranean, enjoy cheap products there because it's cheaper often than in Poland, and come back to Poland to work, It's a very nice life, and Poles can afford it. More and more, basically, in Warsaw for sure, and major cities. And it's very difficult to tell people, what, the sunny weather is ending, actually has ended, something like that. And those people voted, of course, for the opposition. And we'll see. We'll see what happens. Remember President Truman in the U.S.? Once Roosevelt died during the term, all decisions were not made yet at the end of the war. So Truman had to step in, and he was from Kansas somewhere. He was a product of the Kansas political system, as Kissinger, Missouri, neatly put it in his book on diplomacy. And probably nobody thought that he would be on the helm of the American foreign policy and containment against Soviets over the next few years and build a system, right? after George Kennan's long telegram, and all this discussions about surprise, guerrilla in Greece, support by Soviets, about all those things, that it entailed. And Truman showed his resolve and stood the ground and made a change.
Yeah, I think a lot about the Truman presidency and the things that maybe he wasn't ready for, and Korea and Taiwan and everything else. But before I let you go, I feel like I always ask you this question, but it feels more pertinent than now than ever, especially when we're talking about Russia and the intermarium and everything else, which is the future of Poland's relationship with Turkey, Europe's relationship with Turkey, where Turkey fits in as a piece here. Because right now, Turkey obviously doesn't feel strong enough to go against Russia, but they're building their own. They have they have found gas off of the Black Sea that they're trying to develop. They're trying to reinvigorate their own agricultural system so that they're not importing so much wheat and things like that from Russia in the future. You can sort of see Turkey gearing up for a world where Russia is not just a pragmatic friend, but they also have their problems with NATO and their problems with Europe. The war between Israel and Gaza also goes into this. So give me your take on where Turkey fits into this puzzle that you've created.
I think that somewhere around the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, the Turkish leadership, Turkish leadership came to conclusion that the U.S. primacy is ending. The primacy, and with this unipolar moment, and which translated into the U.S. representatives sitting at each them negotiating tables across Eurasia and all major things, including Azerbaijan and stuff. Because of the failure in Mesopotamia, because of other things, the rise of. And that means that Turkey, is where it is, on the Straits and into Anatolia, and projecting and political influence into Mesopotamia and elsewhere, and Caucasus. So it started playing the game as if the primacy didn't exist anymore, and Turkey was getting ready for that. And I remember telling this to me by one of the Turkish officials in Warsaw, where he claimed that prior to the war in Ukraine that, wake up, dear Poles. He told me that bluntly into my eyes, that the U.S. power is ebbing away from Eurasia, quote, unquote. And we will be on our own. And that means we face Russia, Iran, guerrilla warfare in the south, and so on and so forth. And Ottoman, and he didn't say that, but I added, Ottoman Empire must be there, right? Something like that.
Of course.
So I think that they decided that despite their rhetoric, the United States doesn't have resources and means to support the primacy. And that will herald the Kindleberger trap, meaning the vacuum of power. And that usually causes imbalances and chaos, wars, hybrid warfare. And they were right in a way. And they must be ready on their own, because the U.S. will be just offshore balancer, acting from beyond the horizon, using the Turks, as the U.S. pleases. Still, they treat NATO as a shield, but they have their own sword. Again, this is quote unquote from the Turkish official. And basically, this is what they've been doing. Please note the 20th century and the 19th century of Turks. Once they opted the continent for a continent, they lost the war. So then they found shelter under the American wings when Stalin pressed for the Straits. And then they navigated alongside the Americans, right, to become secure from the Soviet threats from the north. But now Russia is weaker. Turkey is taking Russia and Caucasus, as you know, and winning. It's not afraid of Russia. Of course, it's like Bismarck said, you make a deal and you fight. One night you make a deal, another fight you kill. Another night you kill. This is how they've been doing. So a default system in Eurasia without the primacy. And this is how they behave. And this is how they behave. And speaking of Israel as the last thing, And the current situation, I'm very much preoccupied because Israel doesn't have strategic depth. And if you don't have the strategic depth, and if you are driven by emotions, you can limit your maneuverability long term. And that's very bad.
Yes.
And
I couldn't have said that better myself. I mean, the reason that Israel prevailed in 48 and 67 and 73, to your point, they didn't have strategic depth, but they were able to respond with lightning speed across different theaters because they had unity of purpose and they knew exactly sort of strategically what they needed to do. And it is hard to see that happening. It's hard to see that in what they're doing today.
Even not only hard to see, which is of course an accurate description by you, but also it's very difficult to imagine the one, which is even harsher, right? So that's a very tough situation for Netanyahu and the Israel leadership, given all complexities of war and human rights and geostrategic position, long-term security of Israel.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this as well. And in some ways, I think any Israeli government has this very difficult because for Israel, its ongoing existence forever has become an existential issue for the Israeli government. And I guess all governments think that way in general, but it seems like Israel makes decisions with the weight of that history on its shoulders rather than, to your point, maybe just dealing with the exigencies that it has in front of it. But it's a very difficult position. We can criticize the Israeli government for reacting with emotion, but how could they not react with emotion? How could a democracy like that not react with emotion to what's happened to them recently? So it's a very difficult position.
It all, of course, pertains to the question because democracies tend to react emotionally and demand unconditional surrender, some sort of palpable end results that feed emotions, saturate emotions. I don't know. It's a very dire situation for Israel, strategically.
But I think that's a good way to close because I think the United States has the same issue. And it goes back to that. I loved what you said about the United States stopping becoming an empire and becoming a country. If your goal is that, everybody should think that you're right and everyone should respect your power and everyone should do exactly what you say to do, even for a power as strong as the United States, it's completely unrealistic. But that basically is U.S. foreign policy right now. Whereas, you beautifully exemplified Turkish pragmatism. And the ironic thing with pragmatism is that pragmatism is a uniquely American philosophy. So you would think that it could make its way into foreign policy considerations, but it seems devoid.
U.S. power has been so preponderant over many decades that I think that strategic circles in D.C. got used to that.
All right, well, Jacek, I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you for battling through your illness and also the technical difficulties. It's great to see you, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you very much. And it is true, I was not in the best shape today, but I really wanted to see you. Thank you very much.
It's okay. You're not in the best shape, but still better than most people's best shape. So we appreciate you making the time.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor.